Snow drifted over the lonely frontier station, as though the sky were shaking loose its last fragile thoughts. Evening bled into the rails, soft and blue, while lanterns shivered against the wind like sentries struggling to stay lit. The halted train gave a long metallic sigh, steam curling around the platform in slow ribbons that wrapped the world in a pale veil. In the center of that fading light stood a young woman, who looked as if winter itself had claimed her. Martha Ellery. Her boots were soaked through from hours of waiting, her fingers stiff as carved ivory. Yet it was her eyes that told the truth of her suffering. They held a quiet resilience, a softness bruised but not broken, as if she had spent years learning how to endure storms without ever asking for shelter. Snow settled on her lashes. She did not blink it away. Perhaps she no longer felt the difference between the world's cold and her own. Pinned to her shawl fluttered a note, its paper stiffened by frost, its message etched in harsh, slanted letters that looked carved by anger itself. Touch and die. The wind tugged at the corners, making the warning dance in and out of view for any passerby brave enough to look. Most were not. The station folk kept their distance, watching her with cautious sympathy, unwilling to approach a girl marked by such a threat. No one knew who had written it. No one dared ask. Fear travels faster than truth on winter roads. Martha had been abandoned hours before. A deputy she once trusted had promised he would take her somewhere safe, somewhere distant from the trouble brewing behind her. Instead, he left her here, alone in the whitening dusk, slipping away before she realized the train he boarded was not the one meant for both of them. She had chased after him, calling his name into the wind, but the train wheels drowned her plea. When she returned to the platform, breathless and shaking, she found the note pinned to her shawl. She tried to warm her hands by the lantern pole. The metal bit her skin. She half laughed, half gasped, as if mocking her own attempts at survival. The cold crept deeper, threading through her bones with needle-like precision. She wondered how long a person could stand in one spot before becoming another forgotten shape beneath the snow. Still, she refused to sit. Sitting felt too close to surrender, and surrender was the one thing she had promised herself never to give again. The stationmaster passed by once, muttering that a storm was gathering fast, the kind that swallowed towns without apology. He urged her to step inside, but when he caught sight of the note, his voice faltered. He left her with a nod meant to show kindness, though fear sharpened its edges. Martha did not blame him. Fear shaped most choices in this land. It had shaped hers, too, though she wished she could pretend otherwise. A distant crunching of snow broke the quiet, deep and deliberate, like the steps of something too heavy for the earth to ignore. She lifted her gaze toward the far end of the platform, where the swirling snow parted around a towering silhouette. For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to pause, as though unsure whether to swallow or reveal him. He walked with calm certainty, fur cloak draped over broad shoulders, the lower half of his chest bare despite the winter pressing against him. His presence shifted the air, commanding without effort. Dakota Blackthorn, though she did not yet know his name, moved with the steady rhythm of a man who had weathered harsher things than blizzards. His dark hair, braided loosely down his back, glinted under the lantern glow. Snow melted against his skin the instant it touched him. Some part of Martha wondered whether the cold feared him too. He saw her. Not in the way most people see a stranger suffering, but as if he recognized something familiar in her stillness. He slowed, studying the trembling lines of her body, the frost stiffening her dress, the stubborn tilt of her chin. Then his gaze slipped to the note on her shawl. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, yet the shift rang louder than any shouted oath. His jaw tightened. The air around him grew thick with unspoken judgment. Martha braced herself, expecting him to turn away like the others. Instead, he stepped closer. Snow crunched beneath his boots in a slow, measured cadence, each step sounding like a decision already made. She tried to speak, but her voice fractured. The cold had stolen too much from her already. Still, something inside her straightened, refusing to collapse beneath the weight of another stranger's pity. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow folding over her like a cloak the storm could not penetrate. He glanced once more at the threatening message, then met her eyes with a steadiness that unsettled and steadied her all at once. The station seemed to fall silent around them, as though the world leaned in to hear what might follow. Martha felt the shift. It was small, barely more than the tremor of a breath, yet it carried the promise of something that could reshape the night. She did not know whether it was hope or danger standing before her. Winter had a habit of disguising both in the same coat. In that suspended moment, as snow spiraled between them like slow-turning stars, Martha felt the weight of her loneliness tilt, as though the world had shifted a fraction toward mercy. She sensed that this stranger carried storms of his own, yet he stood before her with the promise of refuge. And then he reached for the note. Dakota did not snatch the note or tear it away in anger. Instead, he touched its corner with a single finger, tracing the frozen edge as though listening to the story trapped in its paper. The wind rattled it, whispering its threat into the hollow night. Touch and die. He studied the words long enough for Martha to feel her breath snag in her throat. When his gaze lifted to hers, something inside that look softened, though nothing in his stance suggested uncertainty. He seemed carved from the very bones of winter, unyielding, immovable, yet strangely protective of the fragile life before him. She tried to explain, but her voice barely escaped as a rasp lost to the weather. He did not ask her to speak. Instead, he glanced at the platform where others turned away, pretending not to see her suffering. The snow thickened around them, swirling like restless spirits. Martha felt her balance slip, her knees threatening to fold beneath the weight of exhaustion she had tried so hard to hide. Dakota glanced downward, catching the faint stumble with the awareness of someone who noticed the smallest shifts. He extended his hand, palm open, offering neither command nor pity. She hesitated, fearing her touch might bring danger to him as the warning claimed. Still, her fingers drifted toward his, trembling like leaves in a storm. When her skin met his, a warmth startling and steady surged through her, a warmth she had forgotten could exist. He closed her chilled hand gently within his, not rescuing her but guiding her upright, as if inviting her to reclaim the strength she had nearly lost. He removed the note carefully, folding it once and slipping it into the pocket of his cloak. Martha expected him to discard it. Instead, he kept it, as though he believed the message mattered more than she wished it did. Without releasing her hand, he turned toward the waiting horse tethered near the station post, a tall roan stallion with calm, intelligent eyes. The animal bowed its head toward Martha, as if recognizing a soul as weary as its own. Dakota lifted her with deliberate patience, testing every shift of her weight to ensure she remained steady. He did not treat her fragility as burden, but as something entrusted to him. Settled in the saddle, Martha felt the world rise beneath her, her vision floating above the snowbanked ground as though she had lifted away from despair itself. But he did not climb up behind her. Instead, he took the reins in one hand and began walking at the horse's side, matching his pace to the rhythm of her faint breaths. The storm pressed closer, wind curling around them like a wild thing tasting the air. Lantern light from the station dimmed behind them, until it became only a trembling glow swallowed by the dark. Martha clutched the saddle horn, trying not to shiver so violently. Dakota did not speak, yet his silence felt less like absence and more like steady presence, a quiet meant to let her gather herself without pressure. Snow settled on his hair, melting down the braid until droplets glimmered on his skin like tiny fallen stars. She wondered how a man could walk through winter half bare, and still carry warmth stronger than fire. As they traveled past frost-hung fences and abandoned crates, Martha's thoughts spiraled toward the man who had left her. Harvey's cold betrayal mingled with the sting of the note's threat. She feared what might come after her, feared that trouble would follow the path she and Dakota now carved through the snow. She drew breath to warn him, to insist he leave her to fend alone so he wouldn't pay for her misfortunes, but her voice cracked, splintering beneath the weight of words she hadn't the strength to speak. Dakota glanced up at her, reading the fear she couldn't name. "You are safe." The assurance lived in his eyes, not spoken aloud. His steps remained steady, as if no threat could shift the ground he walked upon. Gradually, the storm thickened into a wall of white that blurred the line between sky and earth. The roan stallion trudged forward, muscles bunching under its winter coat, breath pluming into frost. Martha leaned forward, fatigue tugging her downward. The horse's warmth seeped through her layers, coaxing her into drowsiness. Her head dipped once, twice. The third time, She nearly slipped sideways. Before she could fall, Dakota reached up with one swift arm, steadying her with a gentleness that contradicted the power in his frame. His hand lingered at her back a heartbeat longer than needed, as if reassuring them both she would not be lost to the storm tonight. She forced her eyes open, not wanting to sleep before she understood who this man was and why he had chosen to intervene. He moved like someone who knew loneliness but never surrendered to it, someone who carried unspoken losses with the dignity of an oak carrying winter snow. He belonged to the land in a way she never had, yet he walked beside her, as though they were equals on the same difficult road. The wind howled through the pines ahead, a low warning hum. Dakota paused, studying the darkness with the attentiveness of a hunter listening for something the world was trying to hide. Martha tightened her grip on the saddle horn. For a moment, it seemed he might turn back. Then he stepped forward again, guiding the horse into a narrow path between snow-laden trees that bowed overhead in frozen arches. She watched his breath frost into the air, steady and calm, as though he carried certainty where she had carried fear. Time blurred into the rhythmic crunch of his footsteps. Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, the edges of the world clouded by exhaustion. Each time she stirred, Dakota's presence was the constant she returned to. The deliberate pace, the reassuring silhouette, the sense that he had taken her survival into his own hands with quiet resolve. She felt, for the first time in so long, that she was not entirely alone. Her eyes slipped closed once more, the world dimming. She sensed the movement before she heard his voice. A low murmur carried by the wind, meant less to wake her than to anchor her spirit. When she opened her eyes again, she saw it through the drifting snow. The faint outline of a cabin tucked against the trees, smoke curling from its chimney like a whispered promise of warmth. Her breath caught, startled by the sight. After hours of cold and silence, it looked unreal, a dream painted onto the winter night. Dakota lifted his gaze to her, and in the dim light, she saw something shift in his expression. Not triumph. Not duty. Something far more dangerous to a weary heart. As they approached the cabin, Martha wondered why fate had led her into the path of this solitary giant, what unseen thread tied their steps together. But before she could follow the thought to its end, she felt the horse slow, Dakota's hand brushing the saddle as he halted. He looked toward the tree line, into the dark beyond the drifting snow, his jaw tightening as though sensing a shadow neither of them could yet see. The cabin door groaned open beneath Dakota's hand, releasing a breath of warm air scented with pine resin and smoke. Martha felt it wash over her like a forgotten memory, a warmth so gentle she nearly wept from the shock of it. Dakota guided her inside, brushing snow from her shoulders with the cautious touch of a man handling something fragile yet fiercely important. The room glowed amber beneath the hearth's steady fire, its flames dancing in low, patient rhythms. A woven rug softened the wooden floor, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, their muted fragrance settling like a comfort she had not known in months. Dakota gestured toward a fur-lined bench near the hearth. She moved toward it, limbs trembling with the aching transition from cold to warmth. He knelt to place another log onto the flames, the glow catching the planes of his face, revealing the quiet exhaustion etched into his features. She watched him, realizing he had walked the entire journey beside the horse through snow that would have numbed any other man. Gratitude rose in her like heat from the fire, unfamiliar and overwhelming. When he stood, she noticed the distance he kept, just far enough to offer respect, yet close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence. He set a small iron pot above the fire, pouring water into it with slow precision. The crackle of the flames filled the silence between them. Martha rubbed her hands together, the feeling returning in prickling bursts. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words tangled in the hollow of her throat. After so many betrayals, trust had become something she held like a fragile thread, reluctant to place in anyone's hands. Dakota sensed her hesitation. He stepped to a shelf and retrieved a wooden bowl, its surface worn smooth by time. When the water simmered, he added dried roots and stirred, letting their earthy scent curl through the room. He carried the bowl to her with both hands, offering it as though it were something sacred. She accepted it carefully, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. Warmth traveled through her like an awakening. She sipped, tasting the gentle bitterness that steadied her nerves and loosened her jaw. The silence gradually softened, no longer sharp with uncertainty. She lifted her gaze to him, finding the courage to speak. She told him her name, the syllables trembling like a leaf unclenching from a winter branch. He nodded once, slowly, as if memorizing the shape of it. When she tried to thank him, he lifted a hand slightly, not to silence her but to ease the weight of the moment. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the low warmth of a drum at dusk. "You owed me no explanation," the tone seemed to say. "You are safe here." She felt the words even without hearing them fully. Her story pressed at her chest like a held breath. She released it slowly. She spoke of Harvey's abandonment, of the pressure to sign away her father's land, of the men who believed fear could carve obedience into her bones. Shame trembled in her voice, the shame of being discarded, of trusting someone who treated her life like a burden too heavy to carry. Dakota listened with a stillness that unraveled her defenses. His eyes did not judge. They absorbed, considered, understood. When she finished, her breath quivered, unsure whether she had given too much of herself away. The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks like brief, bright truths. Dakota finally spoke, not of her failures, but of his own past. He shared only fragments, but those fragments carried the weight of whole winters. He spoke of the land taken from his people, the family he could not protect, the way silence had become both armor and prison for him. He offered no details, yet the ache beneath his words told her enough. It surprised her how their wounds seemed to recognize each other, as though loneliness itself had introduced them long before this night. She watched the firelight paint warm gold across his skin, softening the scars that marked him. She wondered how a man who had lost so much could still hold such patience in his hands. The thought unsettled her in a way that felt dangerously close to hope. Time folded gently around them as the storm howled outside. Martha's strength gradually resurfaced. She helped braid newly cut rope while Dakota repaired a saddle strap, the quiet companionship weaving something fragile and earnest between them. The tasks grounded her, reminding her she still had purpose beyond fear. Their silences became comfortable, filled with the soft hiss of steam and the rhythmic scrape of leather. Just as she found herself sinking into the warmth of this fragile peace, the cabin door swung open with a gust of frigid air. A woman stepped inside, bundled in deer hide, her braids streaked with winter gray. She paused when she saw Martha, a knowing half-smile touching her lips. Dakota greeted her with a nod that held respect. The woman introduced herself as Nehima, an old friend who brought supplies during harsh seasons. Her eyes flicked between Martha and Dakota with an amusement that made Martha's cheeks warm. She sensed stories in Nehima's gaze, stories of a man who rarely let others into his solitude. Nehima set down her bundles, speaking softly to Dakota in a cadence Martha did not know but felt the tenderness of. The fire popped loudly, breaking the moment. Nehima studied Martha again, her eyes softening. She murmured something about storms guiding lost souls together, a comment meant lightly yet landing with unexpected weight. Martha lowered her gaze, unsure whether the flutter in her chest was gratitude or fear. As dusk folded deeper into night, Nehima departed, leaving the cabin quieter than before, her absence sharpening the fragile connection between Martha and Dakota. Martha settled near the fire once more, exhaustion tugging at her. Dakota rose to drape a blanket over her shoulders, his touch featherlight yet grounding. She met his gaze, and in the dim glow she saw an unspoken promise, not of safety, but of witnessing her without turning away. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire, and the faint rhythm of Dakota's shaping wood with a carving knife. Her dreams were softer than they had been in years. She did not know how long she slept, but when she woke to the faint creak of floorboards, she found Dakota standing at the window, his breath held still. His shoulders were tense, his body angled toward the darkness outside. She followed his gaze and saw them. 3 distant silhouettes atop the ridge, unmoving against the moonlit snow, watching the cabin with predatory patience. Snow thickened into a white, relentless curtain by the time Martha fully understood what those distant silhouettes meant. The ridge seemed to pulse with danger, the figures standing as still as carved stone, their horses stamping impatient clouds into the wind. She rose from the blanket, her pulse climbing in tight, urgent beats. Dakota did not move from the window. He watched the ridge with the focus of a man who had spent his life reading storms, both the ones cast by weather and the ones born of men. His jaw was carved in tension, as though he had expected this moment long before it arrived. Martha stepped closer, the fire's warmth trailing behind her like a forgotten comfort. She whispered his name, the sound scarcely more than a breath. He answered without turning, his voice low, a distant rumble beneath the storm's rising howl. "They found us." The words weren't meant to frighten her, yet fear slipped like a cold ribbon down her spine. She recognized one of the silhouettes even in the blur of snowfall. Harvey Dobbs, wearing the same arrogance she once mistook for confidence, now perched on a horse like a man chasing a prize he felt was owed to him. Dakota turned from the window, pressing the latch firmly, sealing the cabin against the wind. His calm steadied her, though she sensed the heaviness beneath it. He moved with deliberate grace, gathering his coat, checking the knife sheathed at his side, the quiet efficiency of a man who neither welcomed violence nor shied from it. Martha stepped between him and the door, desperation rising like a tide. She told him Harvey would not stop, that the men with him knew no restraint, that danger had followed her like a bitter shadow long before this night. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself not to break. Dakota rested one hand on her shoulder, grounding her. His eyes, steady, dark, patient, held no fear for himself, only a flicker of worry she knew was meant for her. He said she did not deserve to run from men who thrived on cowardice. She saw the quiet fury beneath his calm, a fire banked deep beneath his ribs. He moved past her gently, but she caught his sleeve, pleading that he not face Harvey alone. She feared not only the violence but the weight of guilt if he were harmed because of her. He paused, softening in a way she had not seen before. "You are not to blame for the cruelty of others," his expression seemed to say. Then he stepped outside before she could argue further, the storm snatching the door shut behind him. Martha stood rooted for a heartbeat, then rushed to the window. Through the swirling snow she saw him descend the cabin steps, every movement measured, controlled. Harvey and his men approached in a brittle arc, their horses stamping fresh fury into the ground. Lantern light swung from one rider's saddle, casting ghostly shadows across the clearing. Harvey dismounted with theatrical flourish, as though performing for an audience only he could see. His voice carried thinly through the wind. He accused Dakota of kidnapping, of harboring danger, of meddling in affairs that did not concern him. He spoke Martha's name like an object he'd misplaced. Rage flashed through her, sharp and clean. She opened the door despite the cold knifing into the cabin, stepping outside into the turbulence of wind and confrontation. Snow stung her cheeks, her hair whipping like a banner in the storm. Dakota glanced back at her, surprise flickering across his features before resolve settled again. Harvey's expression twisted when he saw her standing behind Dakota, her chin lifted, her fear held at bay by the strength blooming painfully inside her. He ordered her to come forward, claiming she belonged with him, claiming she needed protection only he could offer. His words sliced into the night like rusted blades, their edges dulled by lies she once believed. Martha answered him, her voice trembling yet clear. She told him she would never return, that the only danger she faced had been believing the promises he made with a coward's heart. Harvey's face reddened, his bravado cracking. He spat insults toward Dakota, calling him a thief, a savage, a man unworthy of standing between him and what he desired. Dakota did not flinch. His stillness radiated more power than any raised weapon. His voice, when it came, held the force of a winter river beneath ice. "Martha is not yours to claim." The air tightened, charged with the invisible clash between pride and principle. One of Harvey's men shifted, hand drifting toward the holster at his hip, but Dakota's gaze cut to him with a warning so sharp the man froze. Martha felt the storm churn around them, snow spiraling in frantic patterns, echoing the turmoil knotted inside her chest. She stepped closer to Dakota, close enough that her shoulder brushed the edge of his coat. Her presence there was not born of fear but choice. Harvey realized then that he had already lost her, lost control, lost the illusion of superiority he had wrapped himself in for so long. His bravado faltered. He swung onto his horse with a frustrated grunt, threatening that Martha would regret siding with a man like Dakota. She met his glare, unshaken. His threats slid off her like snow melting against fire. He and his men retreated into the storm, silhouettes swallowed one by wind and distance. Silence pressed in, thick and trembling. Martha's breath shuddered as the weight of what had just unfolded settled over her. Dakota turned toward her, concern etched deeply into the lines around his eyes. She had been brave, yet bravery did little to soothe the rawness left behind. She trembled, not from cold, but from the unspoken fear that she had brought danger to the one person who had given her shelter without question. Inside the cabin again, the fire's glow wrapped them in warmth, but the air remained fragile. Martha's emotions cracked open, spilling in a quiet storm of tears she tried to hide. Dakota moved to her side slowly, giving her space yet offering presence. When she finally allowed herself to lean into him, his arms closed around her with a gentleness that felt like a promise he had not yet spoken aloud. But even as comfort settled between them, Dakota withdrew suddenly, stepping back as though scalded by the closeness. He told her she should leave for town once dawn arrived, insisting it would be safer for her. The words struck her like a blow. She misunderstood, believing he wanted distance, believing she was a burden he wished to cast away. Her heart tightened painfully, the warmth of moments before collapsing into uncertainty. Dakota stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid, silence stretching like another storm between them. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the echo of departing hooves. Yet in the hollowness between his hesitation and her hurt, the unspoken truth trembled, gathering strength like thunder waiting just beyond the horizon. The wind rose before dawn like a wounded animal searching for a place to bury its pain. Martha woke to its mournful cry, her chest still tight from the words Dakota had spoken hours before. "Leave at dawn." The fire had burned low, embers glowing like small, stubborn hopes refusing to die out completely. Dakota sat near the hearth, sharpening a blade with slow, rhythmic strokes. His face was carved with conflict, his eyes shadowed as though he had not slept at all. She watched him, feeling the distance between them thicken like ice forming across a river. Thin at first, then dangerous enough to split the world in two. He sensed her stirring and paused, the blade poised midair. The silence between them carried the weight of choices neither wanted to face. She whispered his name, but her voice slipped into the quiet like a fragile thread. He stood, returning the blade to its sheath, and met her gaze with something like apology and warning intertwined. His hesitation struck her deeper than any cold wind could. She wanted to demand why he pushed her away when he had risked so much to save her. Yet questions trembled behind her lips, unspoken and heavy. Before either could break the silence, a distant thunder of hooves fractured the morning stillness. Dakota stiffened, turning toward the window. Martha's pulse quickened, dread pouring through her veins. The storm had not kept Harvey away, it had merely veiled his return. Shadows emerged through the swirling snow, riders, moving with hungry determination. Dakota moved instantly, grabbing his coat and stepping into the storm before she could rise. Martha followed, the cold slashing across her face as they stepped outside. Harvey rode at the front, fury twisting his features. His horse reared, steam billowing from its nostrils. He shouted accusations lost to the wind, claiming Martha had been bewitched, stolen, corrupted. His voice rang with desperation disguised as authority. Dakota stepped in front of her, the storm swirling around him like a cloak woven from the earth's breath. He spoke with a calm that grated against Harvey's chaos, telling him to leave, that Martha's choice was her own. But Harvey lunged from his saddle, grabbing Martha's arm with a force that tore a cry from her throat. The world blurred into panic, snow, and the sharp sting of betrayal resurrected once more. Dakota moved faster than the wind, wrenching Harvey away with a controlled fury that left no room for doubt. The men with Harvey drew back, unsettled by the tension shimmering between the two. Harvey staggered, rage twisting him further, reaching for the gun at his belt. Martha stood frozen, the storm and fear merging into one suffocating blur. Dakota stepped between her and the weapon, his body a living shield. His voice boomed through the storm, not loud, but powerful enough to stop Harvey's hand. He reminded Harvey of his cruelty, the note, the abandonment. Each word landed like a stone thrown into deep water, sinking out of sight, but leaving ripples no man could ignore. Harvey faltered, his anger crashing into the truth he'd spent months avoiding. The moment stretched, taut and trembling. The storm howled. Martha's heart pounded. Harvey's eyes shifted, from Dakota's unshakable stance to Martha's fearful, resolute face, and something in him broke. Not remorse. Pride. He spat into the snow, turning away as though discarding a fight he could not win. His men followed, their hooves beating a retreat swallowed quickly by the storm's hungry silence. When they disappeared into the white, Martha's knees trembled. Dakota turned to her, his breath forming clouds that drifted between them. He reached out as if afraid she might vanish if he touched her too quickly. She stepped toward him, but he shook his head, pain flickering across his expression. He told her again she should leave, that staying near him meant danger, that a woman like her deserved a life untouched by the violence that followed him like an unbroken shadow. She had never felt so split apart. She wanted to scream that she was tired of being pushed away, tired of being treated like fragile glass when all she had ever done was fight to survive. Instead, her voice trembled with something far deeper. She told him he was wrong. She had never felt safer than in the presence of a man who shielded her without claiming her, who listened without judgment, who saw past the wounds she tried so hard to hide. Dakota's shoulders sagged, as though her words unthreaded the defenses he had spent years stitching around his heart. He stepped closer, the fire of the cabin glowing faintly behind him, casting warmth across his strong features. He confessed, voice low and breaking, that he had kept distance not from lack of feeling, but from too much of it. He feared losing her, feared the world would take her from him as it had taken so much else. His heart had been winter for so long that he no longer trusted the thaw. Martha reached for his hand, her fingers trembling not from cold but from truth. She told him winter was not meant to be survived alone, that she wanted a life with him, not because he saved her, but because he saw her, truly saw her. His breath caught, and in the space of a heartbeat, the storm around them felt quieter, as if the world leaned closer to listen. He drew her into his arms then, with a tenderness that felt like sunrise breaking through a long, unforgiving night. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, hearts aligning in a silent vow. He whispered that he loved her, not as a man desperate for warmth, but as one who had finally found his missing piece. She whispered the same, tears warming her cheeks despite the icy wind. They married days later beneath pine trees heavy with new snow, Nehema standing as witness. Dakota wrapped Martha in a cloak stitched with symbols of protection. She slid a braided leather band onto his wrist. Their cabin became a sanctuary of laughter, of shared meals, of quiet evenings softened by firelight. The world outside remained harsh, but within those walls, love grew steady and sure. And yet in the softness of one late evening, as chimney smoke curled into the twilight and Martha rested against Dakota's side, a distant sound drifted across the snow. Hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable, reminding them that peace, once earned, must be guarded with equal devotion.